current role as Chief Advisor and Lawyer for the Australian Muslim Advocacy Network sees her co-chairing the cohesive community coalition Better Laws for Safer Queensland. The Queensland Parliament is taking submissions from interested parties on vilification and hate crimes until 12 July. However, tonight you'll be able to hear firsthand from the dynamic person driving this issue, and I know Rita will be able to enlighten you on what is happening and will also be able to help you with any issues that may arise. A lot of us have heard a lot about what's going on with the cohesive community coalition, and it's very obvious to anyone who's read any of the emails that the person who's been writing most of the emails and doing most of the work is Rita. She's an outstanding advocate, so I welcome you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, and peace and greetings to everyone here. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I'll move closer to the mic. Okay, so my name's Rita, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathering on the lands of I think it is the Jagera peoples here. Is it still the Jagera peoples? I live 10 minutes away, so I'm assuming it's the same people. I'd like to pay my profound respects to First Nations peoples of this country. I'd also like to pay my respects to this council. It's just been blowing me away tonight, seeing all those prayers and seeing the intent that is behind this council. It's really, really beautiful to see. And I'd like to thank Gail and Margaret for inviting me, and Uncle Habib Jamal for making the suggestion, and to pay my respects too to Uncle, because he's a very good example of the tireless sacrifice that goes into being a community leader. And I'm sure there are many people in this room that fit that role and that category. And I'd like to also thank all the people here who are spiritual leaders, who are present here in this room, and who contribute to the formation of our children and our families and our communities and their spiritual lives. Thank you. So I might just shift this a little bit so I can see it without tipping my head. That works? Sorry, I'm all new age here with my iPad. Yeah, no, it's all good. It's working well. So gatherings like this really remind us what encapsulates human life. We are all pretty insignificant as human beings, but we are also quite significant in the sense that, you know, in the Islamic faith tradition and probably in other faith traditions here too, we carry within us a gem of that higher being or that higher essence. And what we do in our spiritual lives is try to do some sort of service to make the world, a safer and kinder place. We are living in a world that's increasingly isolated and broken and individualistic. And faith always invites us to soften our hearts, to brush away noise and to remember our intentions. We push away the masks that conceal our frail bodies and weaknesses, and we return to our faith, our bonds, and our purpose. I speak to you today as the co-chair of the Cohesive Communities Coalition that is running the Better Laws for Safe Queensland campaign. I'm pleased to represent more than 20 organisations here in Queensland that are part of this coalition, and the co-chair, who is Christine Castley from Multicultural Australia. It is true, I'm a lawyer, and I've also been a high school teacher and worked in politics. But when the Christchurch massacre happened, I was actually on maternity leave because I was about to give birth to my second child. And I was very much affected, as it was live streamed and running on the news at the time, and it was next door in New Zealand, and it was an Australian who carried out the attacks. So it was very close to home. And I remember being very afraid that day because my husband was just about to go to mosque to pray for Jummah. And I was begging him not to go because I was terrified that this was actually some sort of coordinated attack and that there was going to be someone waiting for him in the Australian mosque, which he told me was stupid. But I didn't think it was stupid at the time. I was in tears. And after that event, I thought to myself, what can I do to try and contribute to law and policy in Australia to help make Australia feel a safe and welcome place for every human being living here. In the months after this event, I began working as the first advisor to the Australian Muslim Advocacy Network, which is a new lobbying and policy development research body working to secure the psychological and physical safety of Australian Muslims. Not long after this, the Holland Park Mosque was graffitied with terms calling for the expulsion and murder of Muslims and calling St. Brenton Tarrant a saint. In media reports, the police at the time referred to it as willful property damage because that was the available crime or criminal offence to use to describe that. These crimes wreak havoc on the psyche of a community. Property damage wasn't the right name for what happened. And the same can be said for the brazen and downright disgusting graffiti of Nazi symbols on our roads and trains, which have happened quite recently. And I really pay my respects to the Jewish community because I know how dehumanising it would be to be seeing Nazi symbols. The celebration and glorification of genocide of any group on the basis of their race or religion is happening in real places, physical places, around Brisbane, Queensland, and it's also happening online, and it's unacceptable. And unfortunately, it hasn't been captured by our existing criminal vilification laws. So a lot of that can actually be captured by existing criminal laws. We have one law for inciting harm against groups on the basis of race, religion, other protected characteristics, and it's been used three times in the last 20 years. Most cases are never prosecuted. So when the Queensland Human Rights Commission and Brother Ali Qadri from the Brisbane Muslim community came to me and said, there's this group of people coming together and they're really energised and motivated because of what's happening with COVID and what's now happening to the Asian community. We need to try and grab this moment. So I thought, let's do this. And just as a little bit of background as to what drove me towards hate crime as a particular thing, after I started working for Amman, I was helping the Islamophobia Register, which is a national register that collects hate incident reports from Muslims, and they were trying to release their second national report of all their data. And I was helping with the media. And so my job was to ring up victims and ask them whether they would be interested in sharing their story. And obviously that's a big ask, and not many people wanted to share their story at all. So I ended up having to speak to a lot of victims, and that had a really profound impact because I was speaking to people from all walks of life. In this case, they're all Muslim. But I was speaking to mothers, teenage girls, fathers, and one case, actually there's a few cases that really almost destroyed me because they were just so awful, and I can't repeat them because I don't have permission to repeat them because they didn't agree to share their stories publicly. And that's something I'll just touch on in a moment. For a lot of victims, there's a lot of shame and humiliation that comes with experiencing this. And that's one of the reasons people don't want to report. At the time, there was one father who was really brave, and he was like, that's it, I'm going to speak to the media, I'll speak to any journalist you want me to speak to. I am determined to speak and tell this story because of the impact it had on me and my family. So his name was Syed, and he was a father who went to the Queensland Museum one day with his family here in Brisbane. And on the way home on the train, this stranger came up to him and his family, and he had 3 little kids. The youngest was just a few years old, and shouted in their faces for being Muslim, swearing in their faces, in the face of his wife, and right into the faces of his children. And then he threatened to throw his youngest child off the train. And all the while, no one else said anything. And I think, it's probably, we see this issue a lot. It's quite common for bystanders to not feel safe enough to say something or do something, or feeling like, what do I say, what do I do? But this really compounded their feelings of isolation, that no one said anything. And they were really traumatised by that. And it had this, they held on to their ticket for 5 years after that, their train ticket. It had all these effects for his family, for his marriage, for his kids. They ended up leaving Queensland, moving to Victoria. The kids had this belief, which he's still trying to get out of them, that Australians hate us and we can't be Australian. And you think about it, it's just so damaging, this kind of stuff. So he was very passionate about speaking out, and he did. But I also saw the pain in him as a father and as a husband, and that broke my heart because I was thinking about my own father and my own husband. And, my husband's also been the victim of a hate crime. My sister-in-law has been. I think just about every woman in my family who wears hijab has been abused at some point in their life, walking about in public. I think there's probably a lot of feelings of concern amongst young girls growing up now about wearing hijab. I'm concerned about it. I'm not sure. I have 2 daughters. I'm not sure, what I'll say to them when they're growing up and they're making the choice about wearing it. So this is, obviously a big concern in our community, but it's a concern that once I met this group of people that the Queensland Human Rights Commission brought together, I didn't have to explain anything to anyone, because everyone in that group, the Jewish, Sikh, Chinese, just trying to think off the top of my head of all the different backgrounds that were in that group, they immediately understood. African, right? A lot of African. Immediately understood. And it was like Indian. It's all going to come to me gradually now, the different nationalities represented in that group. People immediately were like, we all understand each other. We know what we're experiencing. We don't have to try and convince each other about what needs to happen. We just have to lean in to mix our skills and our connections and make something happen right now. And so we did. And there was a great mix of skill sets. Some of us are lawyers, some of us are communications people, uni students. It was a mixed bag. And so I'll just explain here how a hate crime is different to a normal crime. A hate crime is where there is that element of discriminatory hatred. And it's different to other crimes because other crimes you might say you're targeted because, you're in a road rage thing and someone abuses you because you're a bad parker, right? You're a terrible parker. Or maybe someone steals from you because you're wearing a really nice watch, right? A lot of crimes are motivated because of what you're doing or what you're wearing or having on you, on your person. But hate crimes are different because it's an attack on you because of who you are and things that are intrinsic to you, like your religious identity, your skin colour, your race. And there is nothing you can do to change those things. They're inherent to you. And so if it's an attack on that, it's actually an attack on your inherent dignity as a human being. And it doesn't matter how good you try to be, and we see this a lot amongst hijabi sisters, trying to be such a good model human being, a good person, so no one will ever pick on you. But it doesn't work because it's not for that reason that you're being attacked. And that's what makes hate crime particularly egregious. It's an attack on your inherent dignity as a human being, and it makes people feel inherently unsafe from that moment onwards. So we are really wanting that additional culpability to be recognised at law. So if someone does vandalises a place of worship or threatens someone in the street or harasses them in the street, is a public nuisance, right? This is a standing criminal law is public nuisance, getting in the way of someone, obstructing their peaceful enjoyment of a place. We want that to be regarded as a hate crime if there is that extra element of discriminatory hatred, and it basically would mean that it is like a racially aggravated public nuisance or a racially aggravated assault a racially aggravated property damage or religious, on the grounds of religious discriminatory hatred. So it would just mean that the sentence or that would be recognised at law, which means so much for victims and whole communities to have it named for what it is. That is such a big deal, right? But the second thing is you can also potentially increase the penalty. And we aren't just looking at jail sentences. We have a law group that is part of this coalition. We're looking at all different types of solutions. We understand that there'll be a mix of things available, fines, community service. There are even a lot of talk about restorative processes, so like requiring an offender to come and meet with the community that they've hated upon, where it's agreed by the community and where it's safe. Sometimes you don't want to necessarily meet. Depends on if they're a neo-Nazi, you might be like, okay. But we do want those options to be there. So during that time, when we all came together, we developed an options paper. We did that by consulting amongst our group, developing options, legal options of what we wanted to change. We took that to Labor and the Liberal National Party ahead of the last Queensland state election, and the Palaszczuk government agreed to refer it to a parliamentary inquiry if they were re-elected. They were re-elected. It got referred to a parliamentary inquiry. The Liberal National, the opposition, so far seems to be quite conducive and open to this. The members on the committee from the Liberal National Party see the validity of our concerns, and that this would benefit even every diverse electorate, which is every electorate in Queensland. And we have a parliamentary inquiry that is now opened and is running and closes on the 12th of July. So this is where I come to you, dear respected brothers and sisters of faith. We know that racism is man-made and that racism can be unmade through personal connection. And that is the brilliance of your council, right? And your work, and may you always be blessed in this endeavour. But we now need to lend our voices to expand the range of stories that are being put to this inquiry. You don't have to speak only as a victim of hate crime. You can speak as a member of a community that has experienced hate crime. You can speak as someone who is concerned about hate crime, or maybe as a bystander. You can speak in any capacity to support the options paper and to support the idea that this needs to be recognised at law. Obviously, the more Queenslanders of all different backgrounds who support this, the greater appeal it will have, because it won't seem like it's politically, divisive or contentious, which it's not. The reality is that our current justice system is complicit in adding to social isolation, exclusion and trauma, and we can turn that around. As I say, there's a legal subgroup within our coalition that's doing even more work on solutions. We are meeting with police in the next week, Queensland Police, because we want to make sure that the solutions we come up with are easy and applicable. I think Mokhtar is here. He's a member of our legal subgroup, and he's meeting us with the Queensland Police as well. We are so determined to come up with things that will actually work and be applied and be meaningful to community. So we don't end up with a situation where there's this big build-up and then government comes out and says, we're going to do X, Y and Z, and X, Y and Z has zero relevance to our lives. So we want to avoid that situation. So this subgroup, which has representatives from a range of different communities who are involved, will be coming up with some solutions, socialising it amongst our coalition at the end of June and end of this month. And if the council wishes to make a submission, or any individuals here wish to make a submission and would like to know what are those ideas so we can support those ideas, please stay in touch with me and I will add you to our contact list, or I'll let Gail know and Margaret know. So the unity of purpose has been why we've been so successful so far. And we're trying to keep that success going. our children are looking at all of us wondering what sort of country they're growing up in sometimes. There are barriers, but there are barriers to people sharing their stories, and I just want to very briefly touch on this before I wrap up. One is shame and humiliation. Two is normalising what happens. This is a really big problem, seeing it as normal. So we actually have to denormalise it, which means sometimes actually spelling it out to people in our community. Hang on, you see this as normal. You have to stop seeing it as normal. Because you might see it as normal, but do you want it to be normal for your kids? Do you want it to be normal for your grandkids and for your other family members? The third thing is people can't imagine a better system or better future, and that's where it helps to actually talk about the fact that there are good hate crime laws in other UK, other places, and we can do something here. There's a lot of interest. And the fourth thing, fear of repercussion. Yeah. So that's, people are afraid of, if I speak up about this, will I become a further target? Because I don't want to become a further target. I just want to disappear and have no one talk to me again about this. So these are, and that's why I really am reaching out to you, because there are no shortcuts with this kind of process. We are dealing with a very deep but delicate and painful underbelly of, it's up there with domestic violence, rape, other issues where people aren't going to just run forward with their stories. So it takes advocates and community leaders to be there to support people, hold their hands, to speak on their behalf, to, we have support. We do have support. Multicultural Australia has set up safe space locations in a number of places, in Brisbane, Toowoomba, a few other places in Queensland. I can provide those to people if they're interested. I can just mention. This Saturday at the Islamic College of Brisbane, there's a safe space for listening between 10 and 4. When I say a safe space, I mean that there's someone with a video camera and audio equipment being able to record, and they do the consent forms. There's also a counsellor present. So that's happening on the Gold Coast at the Multicultural Community Council Gold Coast on the Monday 28th of June. Access Community Services in Logan is having something on Tuesday the 15th of June and the 22nd of June. Toowoomba Multicultural Centre, Zilmere Community Centre, Holland Park Mosque on the 26th of June, Banyo Library, Red Plains Community Centre, and I think they're the main locations that Multicultural Australia is doing. I know a number of other organisations are also organising their own in community type consultations. So tonight, this is just my final thing, there is a support person here who's kindly provided by Multicultural Australia. His name's Carlos, he's at the back there. He has some pamphlets which he'll hand out, which if you want to write something down and hand it to one of us, or to hand it to to submit it later, you can. It gives you all the information about the inquiry. Also, he is here if you wish to seize the moment and just speak candidly to him now on video or audio about an experience either that you've had or that someone in your community has had, or that, for example, if it's like vandalism on a place of worship, how that made you feel, or even as a bystander, or even just as a general Queenslander who's concerned about this issue. I just thought we'd seize this opportunity and have someone there, because it's no moment like the present. You can remain anonymous. Sorry, there's a lot of detail here, so I've just got to make sure I cover everything. You can remain anonymous. There are consent forms for you to sign if you do wish to do video or audio, so the evidence can be used appropriately in the submission of Multicultural Australia to the inquiry. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover tonight. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope I didn't go on too much. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, David. It's a little lawyers' club.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Rita, thank you for coming tonight and speaking to us. Your presentation was relevant, informative, and it was attention-grabbing. You spoke from your experience as a Muslim woman, but also as an advocate for all faith communities and people who are seen as different. Law reflects the ethics and standards of a society. They're the signals we give out to the world. And law changes over time to reflect changes in society. The current provisions as to racial vilification that you referred to are contained in Queensland in the Anti-Discrimination Act. I was involved when that Act was drafted. That Act was introduced in 1991. Now, there's some significant things when you look back on that. Australia, Queensland in 1991 was a different place to where it is now in 2021. But consider for a moment, that was the first Anti-Discrimination Act in Queensland as recently as 1991. Before that, the things that we take for granted, the ability of a person who's visually impaired to take an assistance dog onto a bus or a train or into a public space, was nowhere protected. The ability of someone who had a mental disability or a mental health problem to be treated with dignity and equality, or the ability of a person who had a physical impairment was in a wheelchair to have access to a public space in the same way as other people, wasn't part of our law in 1990. In 1991, it was. And the original drafting of the Anti-Discrimination Act didn't in fact have anything about racial vilification in it. That was an amendment that came along as it was being discussed. And it provided the provision that you spoke about for, you had to show that there was an incitement of actual violence in other people. Well, now we've moved on from 1991 to 2021, and what you're agitating for and what the committee is looking at is to say, well, now as we sit in Queensland, have we moved on? Is Queensland 2021 different? Is the composition of a society different? I mean, clearly, we now see more women in hijabs on our streets. We see more Asian students in our universities. And what message do we want to say? Do we want to see those people as different? Or do we want to say that we're all Australians and we want everybody to have an equal place? And so you've urged us to participate in an endeavour to transform the identity of our society. This is the opportunity to say what we want Queensland of 2021 to look at, which is different to the Queensland of 1991 and vastly different to the Queensland of 1951. Your presentation tonight reflected a lot of things about you and things that I'm sure we all appreciate. You're enthused, you're knowledgeable, and you're passionate. Your presentation was timely. You've engaged us all. You've put out a call to arms to us all to act, and you've given us a timeline. I'm sure everyone here greatly appreciates your coming, appreciates your presentation, and thank you for it.
Thank you so much.